After the 2023 coronation, Camilla truly believed she was absolutely untouchable. She had somehow survived the blistering, white-hot public hatred of the 1990s, outlived the almost saintly tragic legacy of Princess Diana through a relentless, decades-long media campaign, and quietly coaxed her husband into completely overriding the explicit dying wishes of Queen Elizabeth II. It is a matter of public record that during her Platinum Jubilee in 2022, the late Queen set her ironclad boundary. Camilla should be known only as Queen Consort. That single-word consort was a strict institutional firewall. It was Elizabeth's clever way of legally codifying that Camilla would always remain nothing more than an honorary guest in the royal bloodline, a mere supportive appendage rather than an equal stakeholder in the grand sovereign legacy. Yet the very moment the late Queen was laid to rest, that protective firewall was systematically dismantled. That word consort mysteriously vanished entirely from the official coronation invitations. Camilla was crowned simply as Queen, and King Charles, driven by a deep, desperate need for her presence, allowed the transition. When she stood on the high balcony of Buckingham Palace, looking down at the cheering crowds through the glittering frame of her crown, she believed she had won the long game. She believed the whole monarchy could be reshaped through soft public relations, clever press placements, and nothing but sheer stubborn endurance. But the newly verified Windsor Decree has now utterly and completely shattered that illusion. This is certainly not a mere dispute over historical paperwork or ceremonial seating arrangements. It is a clinical, cold, institutional execution of power. This decree, which legal experts, master archivists, and royal handwriting specialists definitively certified as authentic in late May 2026, focuses entirely on the absolute stewardship of the Windsor Vault. For generations now, the vault has held an almost mythical status within the royal institution. It is absolutely not a simple storage room or a reinforced basement. Inside its heavily protected confines lies the physical and symbolic home of the monarchy's continuity, along with the private correspondence of past kings and queens, unredacted political journals and state-related files that have never once been viewed by government ministers, and priceless royal family heirlooms that form the tangible, deep moral authority of the House of Windsor. The absolute core of Camilla's panic lies in a devastating, highly calculated omission within the text of this newly validated document. As the royal archivists slowly reviewed the decree line by line, comparing its handwritten annotations and historical institutional authorization logs, a glaring, empty void quickly emerged. Queen Camilla's name is entirely absent. She is not listed as an overseer, she is not granted access, and she is completely excluded from any future administrative role regarding these sacred royal assets. This blatant exclusion does not possess the hallmarks of some simple administrative oversight. It bears the terrifying precision of a deliberate long-term defensive strategy enacted by Queen Elizabeth II before her final passing. The severe psychological toll of this discovery has sent Camilla into a state of profound, suffocating panic. Her position at the very peak of British society has always been haunted by a fundamental, unvarnished truth. She possesses absolutely no royal blood. She does not own one single square inch of the Duchy of Cornwall. She does not control the sovereign grant. Indeed, she owns absolutely nothing of the grand real estate that defines the royal image. Her entire empire of status titles and security is wholly dependent on her husband's heartbeat. The moment King Charles III passes away, Camilla faces what senior courtiers are calling administrative homelessness. She will not possess the legal right to remain in her current royal residences unless the next monarch explicitly permits it. Without Charles, she has no independent sovereign income, no structural authority, and no institutional protection. She had fully planned to solve this vulnerability by executing a quiet, highly aggressive power grab in the wake of the coronation, attempting to systematically absorb the late Queen Elizabeth's vast charitable empire to anchor herself permanently and deeply into the fabric of the state. She wanted the British public to look at these historic national organisations and see her face effectively harvesting a moral authority she had never earned. But as she reached out to secure these titles, she found herself slamming directly into a brute force iron wall. Waiting for her in the shadows was a formidable, ruthlessly disciplined alliance that spans 2 entire generations of royal blood. Princess Anne, the Princess Royal, and Catherine, the Princess of Wales, have quietly formed an unbreakable steel trap of a defensive front. They did not launch a noisy public feud or leak messy gossip to the eager tabloids. Instead, they have weaponized the cold, unyielding mechanics of palace protocol to strip Camilla of her influence before she even realized she was actually under attack. As June 2026 unfolds, Camilla is discovering that, while she may have convinced an exhausted king to place a crown upon her head, and she has absolutely no control over the ancient machinery of the monarchy itself. This trap took several decades to build and has finally snapped shut, leaving the Queen standing entirely alone in the dark. The operational framework of the British monarchy never relies on spontaneous gestures or any kind of emotional consensus. Instead, it functions on the cold finality of documented precedent. When the joint task force of royal historians and constitutional lawyers concluded their forensic examination at the end of May 2026, they delivered a verdict that transformed a quiet archival review into a major structural crisis. The document they verified is a highly specific administrative directive concerning the actual stewardship of the Windsor Vault. For centuries now, this space has served as the ultimate vault of sovereignty, preserving the physical history of the royal bloodline itself. It houses private diaries that could completely redefine the public understanding of 20th century statecraft, unredacted telegrams from wartime crises, and precious family heirlooms whose symbolic value heavily outweighs their immense material worth. To control access to this vault is to hold the keys to the Crown's historical legacy. The late Queen Elizabeth II understood that the survival of the institution depended entirely on its perceived moral authority and continuity. Throughout her later years, as she closely observed the shifting dynamics within her own family, she quietly took decisive steps to insulate the core assets of the monarchy from personal disputes and future marital renegotiations. This newly authenticated decree clearly establishes that the custody of these records and artifacts must remain exclusively with those who represent the permanent continuity of the institution. By deliberately omitting Camilla from this entire framework of authorized overseers, the late Queen erected an almost insurmountable institutional barrier. The exact text of the decree explicitly ties these rights of administration to the permanent bloodline and the direct line of succession, ensuring that absolutely no non-royal spouse could ever claim personal ownership or executive control over these national treasures. This calculated exclusion effectively strips Camilla of the one thing she desperately required to secure her future independent institutional bargaining power. In the complex architecture of the court, a title without administrative control is merely an empty shell. Camilla's profound anxiety stems from the stark realization that her position is entirely temporary. Unlike Princess Anne or the Princess of Wales, Camilla completely lacks an inherent constitutional anchor. Her entire status exists merely as an extension of King Charles III's sovereign authority. The official validation of this decree forces her to confront the looming reality of what will happen when her husband's reign concludes. She will find herself legally and structurally detached from the machinery of the state, utterly unable to command the loyalty of the household or access the historical capital of the family she spent 30 long years manoeuvring to join. The intense psychological impact of this administrative isolation has completely altered the power balance behind those palace walls. Camilla now finds herself trapped inside a system that is politely but firmly managing her out of its long-term future. The very apparatus of the court has begun applying the precise directives of the decree, systematically restricting her ability to request any internal documents, modify archival logs. or project her personal influence into the deep administrative sectors of the royal household. Every door she attempts to open within the complex palace bureaucracy is met with polite deferrals and references to constitutional guidelines that she simply cannot override. The physical crown remains on her head, but the actual machinery of the palace has reverted to the control of the permanent royal lineage, leaving the Queen to face an isolating and legally binding reality that no public relations campaign can ever alter. The quiet execution of this institutional containment strategy required an operative with an absolute mastery of palace bureaucracy, and Princess Anne stepped right into that role with devastating precision. Known for decades as the hardest working member of the entire royal family, the Princess Royal operates with a clinical commitment to the crown that leaves absolutely no room for sentimental compromise or personal ambition. Her historical relationship with Camilla is deeply layered, rooted in the complex emotional entanglements of the early 1970s involving Andrew Parker Bowles, and shaped by an unyielding belief that royal status must be earned through silent, tireless service rather than clever public relations manoeuvring. While Camilla spent her early years on the throne focused heavily on visible prestige, Anne was quietly securing the structural perimeter of the institution. Anne's own counteroffensive manifested itself through a brilliant manipulation of historical precedent and administrative protocol. The foundation of her authority rests partly on a highly confidential document drafted back in 2005, right after Charles and Camilla finally tied the knot. Seeing the deep cracks within the family, Anne and her cousin, Princess Alexandra, got a firm official order from Queen Elizabeth II about the royal order of precedence. This paper legally proved that born princesses of the family would never have to bow down or curtsy to Camilla whenever the king was not in the room. By holding on to this rule, Anne kept a permanent shield in place, a flat refusal to let Camilla run the entire royal household. During early June of 2026, Anne turned that defensive shield into an attack, shutting down Camilla's access to the major charity networks. Camilla wanted to fix her public image by taking over the massive network of charities left behind by the late Queen. She targeted big-name groups like the Royal Voluntary Service to try and win over the British public. Anne saw this move as a hostile grab for a sacred legacy, working quietly behind closed doors and using her own deep power inside the palace. The Princess Royal snatched up over 300 of the late Queen's organisations before Camilla's staff even knew what was happening. This swift move locked the new Queen right out of serious royal charity work, leaving her with a blank calendar of tiny, pointless events, while real power stayed right where it belonged with the blood royals. The public got a clear sign of this power shift when Anne's husband was suddenly promoted, Sir Timothy Lawrence, to the high rank of Knight Grand Cross of the Royal Victorian Order, since this special honour is a direct gift from the monarch. Skipping past all state committees, senior staff saw the timing as a total thumbs up for Anne's moves. By rewarding Lawrence's decades of quiet loyalty, King Charles III showed everyone in the palace that real trust had shifted back to his sister, giving Anne the perfect green light to keep tearing down Camilla's fake little empire piece by piece. While Princess Anne was busy building a wall of paperwork in the heart of the palace, the next phase of the plan was launched with brutal force using raw public support and silent symbolic warfare. Catherine, the Princess of Wales, has held a very special place in modern Britain for a long time. Her power does not come from cheap media leaks or office politics, but from a quiet, unbreakable discipline that mirrors the quiet duty of the late Queen Elizabeth II, having just gotten through a tough personal health fight, with an openness that completely changed how people see the royals. Catherine came back to royal duty holding a massive amount of respect and public trust. She represents the quiet, selfless sacrifice people really want to see from the royal family, making a sharp, painful contrast to Camilla's long fight to climb the social ladder and grab a title. Things between the Princess of Wales and the new Queen have always been polite, but extremely cold. Catherine knows exactly how Camilla got her hands on that crown, and as the mother of the next king, Prince George, her focus is locked completely on protecting the direct line of royal succession, working in a totally silent agreement with her husband Thun von William. Catherine has let the quiet machinery of the palace shift the family's cash and resources right away from the Queen. Every big national charity, every single major overseas trip, and every bit of real power that Camilla lost because of the Windsor Decree has been smoothly handed over to the Princess of Wales. This isn't some messy fight for power. It is a clean, sharp return to the rightful order, making sure the future Queen holds all the real respect and authority of the royal family. The most brutal part of this quiet battle has played out right inside the rooms where world leaders meet, through a few very deliberate and careful design changes made inside the state apartments of Buckingham Palace in mid-May 2026. A few classic portraits of the late Princess Diana were quietly hung back up on the walls of the main reception rooms. These paintings, packed away in deep storage during the early days of Charles's reign to keep Camilla happy, were placed right in the shot of every official state photograph. This was a brilliant mind game quietly run from the shadows. By putting the unmistakable face of William's mother right back in the physical heart of the palace, the next generation sent a silent visual declaration of war. Now, whenever Camilla hosts foreign leaders or walks the grand halls, she simply cannot escape the heavy shadow of the woman whose crown she wanted. It is a brutal daily reminder that Diana is permanently carved into the brick and bone of this monarchy. Even worse, this quiet power move came with a massive lockdown on security clearances, directly choking the Queen's daily freedom. Top palace aides suddenly got strict new rules about accessing sensitive files. The security codes and clearance steps for the most private wings of Buckingham Palace were completely rewritten overnight, taking away Camilla's power to dig into private historical files or touch the family's vast art collections. Even the dinner tables and entrance rules at big state banquets have been quietly, but ruthlessly shifted, pulling Catherine right next to the king's true power circle, while freezing Camilla out in a cold, empty corner. The warning is clear. The brief, shaky reign of the consort is being quietly shut down, and the real lasting future of the royal family is now fully backed by the Princess of Wales. This clever trap, built by Princess Anne and backed by Catherine, has triggered a total desperate meltdown inside the Queen's private rooms. For 30 long years, Camilla banked everything on just one single solid reality: the complete devotion and fierce protective anger of King Charles. Whenever the public turned on her with pure rage, or the cold snobbery of high society, or the stiff pushback from palace staff, Charles would always step in, using royal power to shield her. He tore his family apart, battled his own mother, and risked the crown itself just to clean up her image and make her his queen. But when the brutal reality of the new Windsor Decree hit home in early June of 2026, Camilla realised her ultimate, most trusted shield had dissolved into a cold, terrifying total silence. Watching her charity work get stripped away while her private palace keys were quietly turned off. Camilla supposedly locked herself in her suite, crying out for her husband to step up and stop this. She wanted the same fierce, roaring defence that had protected her for 30 years, asking Charles to use his supreme power to throw out what the archivists found, and order his sister, Princess Anne, to tear down the bureaucratic wall choking her royal office. But the defence she expected never came instead. She found only a shattered, exhausted silence that destroyed every ounce of her safety. The king, currently fighting the exhausting physical and mental toll of intense cancer treatment while trying to lead a fragile monarchy through a massive historic shift, simply stared at his weeping wife and chose to do absolutely nothing. This crushing refusal to help marks the absolute final turning point in their long marriage. It was not because he stopped loving her, but because he suddenly realised the hard legal limits of his own crown. He knows Princess Anne is completely untouchable, both legally and morally. The king knows this Windsor Decree represents the final iron will of their mother, Queen Elizabeth II, a monarch whose 60-year judgment still commands total, unquestioned respect in the palace. Challenging Princess Anne over this decree would force Charles into an open, ugly family war, spit on the memory of the late Queen, and push away the very sister who has done the heavy, thankless lifting for this family for decades. Charles knows he owes a massive debt to Anne that he can never hope to pay back. She kept the family together through the worst scandals of the 90s and still does most of the hard royal work while he fights his illness. Left entirely on her own, Camilla has spiraled into a deep, choking panic. Her desperate efforts to stop her name's erasure have only shown everyone how powerless she really is. Over the last few weeks, her team has scrambled to make her look busy aggressively, scheduling tiny local visits, quick photo ops and minor charity stops, just to keep her name in the news. She smiled tightly for the flashing cameras, going through the motions of royal duty with a forced, brittle kind of confidence. But behind the palace walls, these public appearances have been completely hollowed out. The real raw power still lies within the administrative and financial machinery, and that machinery has now been entirely re-engineered against her. The high-level advisors managing the royal budgets, the sharp legal experts drafting future household policies, and the senior secretaries managing the sovereign grant shifted their allegiance to the direct succession. Every single time Camilla's office submits a routine request for increased project funding or an expansion of her personal staff, or even a minor long-term administrative commitment, the proposals are quietly, politely, and very firmly blocked by the palace bureaucracy. The officials constantly cite strict constitutional guidelines, tight budgetary constraints tied directly to the king's reduced schedule, and the precise directives of the newly validated Windsor document. Camilla is slowly discovering the most terrifying paradox of her long, highly calculated life. She sits at the very peak of the British social hierarchy, wearing a crown of massive historical brilliance, yet she has been completely managed right out of her own empire, left isolated within a magnificent empty cage of ceremonial irrelevance. This final resolution marks a definitive victory of structural permanence over her transient personal ambition. In the ancient, completely unyielding logic of the British monarchy, individual players can spend their entire lives executing complex public relations strategies. But the institution itself operates on a timescale that renders these short-term maneuvers completely and utterly irrelevant. As those first weeks of June 2026 draw to a close, that grand, elaborate illusion Camilla Parker Bowles spent 30 long years constructing has been permanently dismantled. The validation of that Windsor decree was no isolated bureaucratic skirmish. It was the final decisive movement of a historical trap that has successfully insulated the core royal assets, all the moral authority, and the long-term structural future of the British Crown from a non-royal spouse who desperately sought to reshape the legacy in her own image. The immediate constitutional reality confronting the Queen is one of absolute total vulnerability. Her entire existence at the apex of the state has been exposed as a temporary arrangement, a conditional tenancy depending entirely on the survival of King Charles III. The cold forensic architecture of the palace has already fully adjusted to this reality, aligning its long-term planning with the direct legitimate bloodline. Behind the closed doors of those administrative offices, the transition protocols are currently being drafted with an icy precision that leaves zero room for sentimentality. When this current reign inevitably concludes, Camilla will not merely step aside. She will be completely detached from the actual operational machinery of the palace. This transforms her into a mere dowager queen with no independent constitutional authority, no executive power, and absolutely no command over the royal household itself. The financial and physical parameters of her future isolation have been very clearly defined by the strict enforcement of these newly verified archival boundaries, because she does not possess a single shred of personal ownership over any royal estates she is facing immediate, brutal administrative displacement. The vast multi-billion-dollar private empire of the Duchy of Cornwall, which funds the entire royal family and controls the very ground upon which the court operates, now rests firmly and securely under the absolute custody of Prince William. All the deeds to the grand residences, the actual sovereign grant allocations, and the vast historical capital of the family belong entirely and directly to the direct line of succession. Camilla will possess no legal right to remain within the state apartments of Buckingham Palace or the historic rooms of Windsor Castle, unless the next sovereign graciously extends a personal invitation, a prospect that remains virtually non-existent, especially given the notoriously unforgiving memory of the future king. While Camilla quietly contemplates a future defined by isolation and permanent structural displacement, the powerful alliance that engineered her containment has successfully secured the continuous, unbroken line of the monarchy. Princess Anne's brilliant silent administrative blockade has guaranteed that the truly massive network of royal patronages and national charities remains firmly under the control of those who view royal status as a matter of lifetime stewardship rather than a convenient tool for personal rebranding. Meanwhile, the Princess of Wales has quietly consolidated an unprecedented level of real moral authority, with her quiet resilience and uncomplaining sacrifice cementing her position as the true, legitimate future of the crown. That symbolic return of Princess Diana to the centre of the diplomatic apartments was far more than just a passing gesture. It served as a permanent visual declaration that the true memory and bloodline of the rightful queen had reclaimed the physical spaces of this entire ancient kingdom. The deep tragedy of Camilla's long and highly calculated campaign is that she reached her ultimate goal only to find it completely hollow. She wears the heavy historic crown she rides in grand state carriages, and she sits upon the throne next to a deeply exhausted king. Yet she controls absolutely none of the actual machinery that governs this royal institution. She remains a queen without an empire, surrounded by the glittering trappings of ultimate power while being systematically managed right out of the history she tried so desperately to rewrite. Princess Anne and the Princess of Wales never needed to engage in loud public feuds or vulgar tabloid warfare. They simply enforced the cold and unforgiving rules of an ancient system built to protect itself from any external intrusion. The long game has finally reached its natural conclusion. The permanent bloodline has once again reasserted its dominance, and the House of Windsor has once again proven that the institution always wins in the end.